The Rivera S120, designed in 1988, was the first all-tube channel switching stereo guitar amplifier, along with the Rivera TBRs, which were designed in 1985. At that time, no other amplifier company had the tonal variations and power options available in one amp.
The S120 was a culmination of my experience with the TBR series. So I designed it in 1989. And what we did was wanted to take the TBR series, which was a channel switching stereo tube amplifier in one package, the one and only, and be able to put it in a combo format to make it more accessible for people. There's a lot of people that were not married to the rack idea, and they wanted to be able to have something in a very traditional format, such as a combo 212, 210, top, and extension cabinets and so on. So that's how we started work on the S120. And it was part of the M series, M60, 60 watt mono, 100 watt mono, and then the stereo. And the stereo had the two power amplifiers as well as the stereo chorus.
The S120 features 60 watts per side, 2 channels, and an additional circuit acting like a third channel called the Slave Master. The S120 also includes a foot switchable reverb, chorus, and a first-of-its-kind true stereo effects loop. Channel 1's voicing was based on the legendary Rivera TBR-1SL, which had great gain and sustain, perfect for that late 80s shred tone. Ted Nugent, Rudolph Schenker, George Lynch, Robin Ford, Steve Lukather, Jeff Baxter, Chet Atkins, Jason Bieler of Saigon Kick, Skid Row, Bruce Kulick of Kiss, and John Sykes of Whitesnake are just a few examples of the legendary bands or players who have owned the TBR and MNS series. On Channel 1, you'll find 2 gain boosts, which are engaged by pulling the bass or treble control.
The lead channel of the S120 was based on the TBR-1SL, the super lead. It has a tremendous amount of gain, very, very tight defined distortion, excellent for chunking on chords or soloing. Now it has several boost switches here, which allow you to change the actual gain structure of the individual amplifier stages. It's more than just a couple of resistors. You're actually changing the gain of that stage. So there's 2 gain controls here, and it's very similar to the TBR-2SL, which also has the 2 gain controls. So you're able to get this, go from light crunch to like monster solo leads on it by being able to adjust how you have the gain set up.
Channel 2 features a treble with pull for bright, middle with pull for notch, and a bass control with a pull for contour. The mid-notch allows you to switch between 550 Hz, which is a tweed-like tone, or 250 Hz, which is reminiscent of a blackface.
The middle control on our amplifiers on the clean channels has what's called a notch switch. So by pulling this notch switch, you're adjusting between 250 Hz to 300 Hz and 550 Hz for the mid-range notch. What does that mean? 250 Hz was like Fender Blackface, and 550 Hz was from the Fender Tweeds, and Marshalls were copies of Fender Tweeds. And that really defined, for most guitar amplifiers, kind of the family of EQ tones. So if you had a very mid-range rich guitar like a Les Paul or a 335, if you wanted to play it clean, you really want to suck out some of that mid-range. So you'd use the 250 to 300 Hz position. But if you had a skinny sounding guitar like a Stratocaster, especially if it was maple body with, say, EMG pickups, and you wanted to fatten it up, you'd use the 550 Hz tweed position to really give more body to the mid-range. So that's a unique feature that we pioneered in our amplifiers, going back to the days when I modified them in the 70s.
The contour increases the bass response, while compressing the mid-range and giving a gentle push on the high end. This feature is very useful for low master volume settings and clean comping.
There's a thing in audio called the Fletcher-Munson loudness curves. And the Fletcher-Munson loudness curves refer to the human ear that as levels go down, the way that we perceive and hear frequency response changes. So what happens as levels go down, bass drops out. We think the bass drops out. It really doesn't, but we hear that the apparent sound changes as levels drop. So what I wanted to do was create a circuit that I could fatten up and warm up the bottom end of the amplifier in a situation where the player was playing at low levels. For example, you're playing in a 50-seat club. It's always a struggle trying to get the right levels and get the right EQ because if you're too loud, you'll rip the teeth out of the first row. And if you're too soft, you're not going to feel good, and it's not going to work with your bandmates. So I created this control called a pull contour. Thank you, Fletcher Munson. And when you pull this, it gives a very nice lift to the bottom end, resonates it, just fills and fattens it out, and then adds some tinkle on the top end. So for example, let's say you're playing a Stratocaster and you're comping and you're doing really some nice R&B rhythm stuff. By just pulling out this control, you can fatten it up without adding a lot of extra overtones or weird EQ points. It's one of the sweetest, nicest things to add to a sound. The treble bright control here on our amplifiers, and we have it on many of our amplifiers, mostly on the clean rhythm and blues channels, allows you to add a 6 dB per octave slope from about 3K up just to add some shimmer onto the control.
Both channels share the Accutronics 3-spring reverb control. The gain and level controls the Rivera exclusive Slave Master. This is a separate slaving circuit within the amplifier, simulating having a powerful amp running at full blast through load resistors, which produce output stage distortion, serving the function of a power attenuator. The gain and level controls function like a volume and master control. The Slave Master also has its own effects loop on the rear panel, so you can have individual effects just on the Slave Master channel for that special lead sound.
Slave Master is kind of a really neat feature that came out of the idea of taking a small amplifier, putting it through a load box with a proper, inductive load and so on, and taking that signal and using that signal as a distortion signal, and then running it through a large power amplifier. So for instance, on the Slave Master here, we have a gain control and a level control that allows you to actually overload this small distortion stage, which emulates the output stage of a small tube amplifier, and then be able to control the level of that distortion. So it's a third sound for the amplifier. It also has its own effects loop. So you can have an independent effect, such as a digital delay or whatever else you want, or an equalizer, on that Slave Master sound alone. And there's a little LED light here which actually tells when the Slave Master, it's on the M series, has a light that tells you what the level control is for the Slave Master.
The speed and depth knobs control the built-in chorus. The stereo chorus features a true stereo input since its signal is received after the effects loop. The depth knob also functions as a pull for presence, which is shared with both channels. Worth noting, the S120 was the first tube amp to feature a built-in chorus.
In order to really hear stereo, you have to have some kind of time delay effect. For example, the Roland JC120, which really established itself, even though it was a one-trick pony, it really did have the magic chorus sound, and it was a quasi-stereo amplifier. And by having the chorus, you can instantaneously hear that the amplifier is a stereo amplifier, because it gives that time delay swirling sound in between the speakers. So it seemed like a great thing to put into an amplifier.
Controls on the rear panel include the power class switch for each power amp channel, which changes the nature of how the tubes operate, as well as how the signal flows through the amplifier. In conjunction with the high and low power switch in the front, the power class switch allows you to run the amp at 60, 30, 15, or 8 watts per side. Each side also features 2 speaker outs accompanied by an impedance selector for proper matching of cabinets. The rear also features the Slave Master loop and the stereo effects loop with send and return level controls.
On the S120, it's a stereo effects loop. There's 2 returns with 2 return level controls for being able to patch true stereo effects, such as many of the delay units out there are chorus units and flangers and so on. So it also allows you to get direct access to individual power amplifiers, the left and right power amplifier.